Here's your money briefing for Friday, June 16th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. Some good news for renters. Monthly payments are declining after several years of steep increases. Wall Street Journal reporter Will Parker joins us. So, Will, how much have rents risen on average over the past several years?
Since the pandemic, rent went up something like more than 25%, according to most metrics. And it did that really quickly, within about 18 months, certainly less than 2 years. And there's really no comparison for that in recent history. It was a rate of increase that certainly most renters had never experienced in their lifetimes.
Renters were really taken by surprise, and their income had fallen off because of the pandemic on a lot of occasions.
Yeah, especially early on in 2020, you had a lot of job insecurity, a lot of layoffs, and it wasn't long after that you started to see things change in the housing market and prices go upwards before many people had really recovered.
So what kinds of declines are we seeing?
So what we're seeing right now, broadly, is not so much a decline in the nominal rent that you're charged every month, but just this out-of-control growth of rents upwards is coming back down to earth. So the pace of the rent increases is much, much slower. It's pretty close to flat. In a few parts of the country, the rents that landlords are charging is actually down somewhat. It is negative. And those places include cities in the Southwest like Phoenix or Las Vegas, which saw some of the most stratospheric rent increases earlier in the pandemic. Those places' prices are starting to come down. But broadly, what you're having nationally is a moderation, and rent is finally not catapulting upwards like it was.
What economic factors are causing this shift?
It's a few things. Starting last year, you started to see demand for apartments come down a bit. Fewer leases happening, vacancies rising. And part of that was simply that rent prices were too high to be sustained, that there were too many renters that had to make critical decisions about their housing because of how high prices were. So things like adding roommates, moving back in with friends and family, or simply just not deciding to move up in life, perhaps moving from a smaller apartment to a larger apartment. All of that started to back off, and that meant prices could not continue to grow at the same level they had been. Other things that were happening is that the migration we were seeing, people moving across the country to new cities and driving up demand, people moving into Sunbelt cities from the Northeast, that kind of activity is also slowing somewhat, and that's also keeping the demand down in some of these markets that had just grown so quickly.
Are we talking rents across the housing rental spectrum where we're seeing a shift in the rents?
Yeah, we're seeing a shift in apartment rentals and in single-family home rentals. But it looks like, from most of the data sources that we have, that the slowdown in apartments is greater than it is for single-family home rentals. And part of that might be that the demand for single-family home rentals, because of how difficult it is to buy a house, is remaining pretty strong. Because if you can't buy, if interest rates are just much too high for you to stomach right now, the closest option for you is to rent a similar house.
What does this mean for renters who've been dealing with double-digit percentage increases for the past several years?
Well, critically, one thing it means is that when you go to get a renewal from your landlord, if you're going to stay, the rent that they're going to ask you to pay is going to need to come down as the prices for apartments that are available out in the market are no longer skyrocketing anymore. So what we're seeing is it's not happening super quickly, but landlords are going to have to adjust their expectations for what their current tenants can pay based on what the rest of the market is doing. So we're going to see more cases where tenants see an opportunity to move to a better apartment with a better rent if their landlords are not adjusting their expectations for what rents are now as quickly as they should be, perhaps.
Speaking of landlords, we saw them get caught in the middle here, especially when rent payments were frozen during the pandemic. What does this shift mean for them?
Non-payment of rent has not been a huge factor in most of the country. Even back earlier in the pandemic, it went down for a while, but rebounded quite quickly. Things like rental assistance from the federal government helped make up a lot of that gap. So, things have continued to be pretty good for property owners. And even if rents are flattening out now, something like 30% increase that they enjoyed over the last couple of years, they're still benefiting from that. The ones that have some problems or that could have some problems are investors who bought buildings recently with a speculative business plan that depended on a rate of rent increase that no longer exists. So people who bought buildings maybe a year or 2 years ago thinking that rents will keep going up double digits and basing their whole business around that, those people narrowly may be experiencing some trouble because of what's happening now.
Did they misjudge the market?
Potentially. Some investors certainly did not anticipate a year in which rent did not go up at all. And that may be a complicating factor if that happens. And that looks like what's going on now is a full year of either no increase in asking rent or even negative, which is where we may be heading in months that are upcoming.
What factors could cause rents to turn around and rise again?
If the economy stays pretty stable, we don't have a big increase in unemployment. If businesses decide they want to start growing again, that may mean that more renters and young people decide to start households, move out and get their first apartments, move up to bigger, better apartments. And that sort of demand will prop up rents and will cause rents to perhaps start rising again. But I don't think anyone foresees a scenario in which rents go back to the double-digit streak that we saw in the pandemic anytime soon.
That's Wall Street Journal reporter Will Parker. And that's it for your Money Briefing this week. Before we go, a quick programming note. We'll be off on Monday in honor of Juneteenth, but we'll be back on Tuesday with a new episode. Our supervising producer is Melanie Roy, and our executive producer is Chris Zinsley. I'm your host, J.R. Whalen. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend.